Glad to see everyone at Kontakt. My name is Sharlai and today I speak with Vladislav Davidzon, who joined us from Boston. Vladislav is an artist, writer, editor and publisher. Today our topic of conversation is a newly published collection of Vladislav Davidzon, Jewish-Ukrainian Relations and the Birth of a Political Nation. And hello, Mr. Davidzon. I would like to start from my first question to you. This question about you wrote that you were sure that Russia would attack Ukraine. How did you know and what were your first thoughts on February 21st when Russia attacked Ukraine?
Hello, and thank you for having me on. So it's obvious following this conflict between Russia and Ukraine for 10 years, as I have been, that it was an obsessive issue for the Russian strongman dictator, Vladimir Putin. And it was always obvious that it would have some sort of operatic conclusion. I was in Kiev the night that it began, and I was actually making a film with Sean Penn about Zelenskyy. And I was at a table full of journalists with Sean Penn filming the scene where we're discussing the start of the war right before the war began. And we were arguing that night, and that argument is in the film Superpower that Sean Penn put out, whether the war would start and how it would start. We all thought that the war would start, and I knew that it would start. I just didn't think that they would bomb Kiev. I thought that they would take Mariupol and the Azov Sea and all of Donbass and maybe Chernihiv. I just didn't think they would be reckless enough to try to take the entire country. So I knew that the war was going to start. We were sitting there in Kiev waiting for it to start. We were making a film about Zelenskyy. We were all writing articles about when is this war starting. We're all hanging out, and all the journalists waiting for the war to start. It was obvious that it was starting. It was high stakes negotiation. It was obvious from from early January that it was going to get going. We just didn't calculate that they were going for a regime change in Kiev in the American fashion of taking Baghdad in 2003. So nothing surprising. We were just surprised at the strategy.
Okay, I get it. And you also call Ukraine a several country for persecuted Jews. Why did Ukraine become this country? And what historical events led us to this?
You know, I had dinner with a friend last night, a Ukrainian Jew, and he's from Kiev, and he left Kiev in 1991, and he didn't come back for about 20 years. He came back in 2011 after 20 years of not having been in the country, and he arrived and he thought, wow, this is a completely different country. We were speaking Ukrainian last night, actually, at dinner, even though we're both Russian and native Russian English speakers, and we're both American citizens. We're having just a dinner and in Boston and discussing this. And he told me that in 20 years the country changed completely and radically. Now, why it happened is a very complicated question, but the fact that it did happen is obvious, and it's an astoundingly liberal and democratic country in many ways by the standards of post-Soviet states. It is astoundingly liberal for how many different kinds of people live there. And because many different sorts of people live in Ukraine, it has become a very tolerant country. So in the way that Russia is a multi-confessional, multicultural country that keeps everyone together by force, Ukraine is a multi-confessional, multicultural country that keeps everyone together with tolerance. It's very interesting.
You also write that the history of Ukrainian Jewry over the past decade is a key factor in understanding the development of Ukraine as a modern nation-state. What about other people, other nations, and the Ukrainian people themselves, who were involved in the creation of Ukrainian history?
Sure. So, first of all, it's a very targeted book. But then when we look at Jews as a heuristic for minorities, the same can be said for the Bulgarians. I'm from Odessa. The region is full of Bulgarian people and Romanian people. The same can be said for the Crimean Tatars. The same can be said for lots of minorities in Ukraine. It is a country full of different sorts of people. And the fact that Jews, who are usually the heuristic for the other, the great metaphor for the other, are treated well, is a metaphor for the fact that the Armenians and the Bulgars and the Romanians and the Crimean Tatars are treated well. I mean, it is utterly remarkable that Ukraine, in the middle of a war, had its Russian-speaking Jewish president, a gentleman of Jewish descent, Zelenskyy, sack his Jewish minister of defense and replace him with a Crimean Tatar who's from a Muslim family. Utterly remarkable, and perhaps not possible anywhere in Eastern Europe outside the German border, right? You can't imagine anything like that happening in Poland or Serbia or Lithuania. You just can't. Of course, these are our allies, but Ukraine is a remarkable country because it has this synthesis of the traditional titular culture of a titular nation, the titular nation being the Ukrainians, and the civic national culture, the culture of everybody born in Ukraine who only have to answer to the question, are you from here? Yes. Were you born here? Yes. Are you a patriot? Yes. And there are no more questions after that, not really. So it's a remarkable country because ethnic nationalism, titular nationalism, cultural nationalism, and universal nationalism, civic nationalism, and civic patriotism are melded in this remarkably tolerant and productive fashion. And that's why I believe the Ukrainian state and the political nation survived on February 24th of last year. I believe if it was I believe if it was still the Ukraine of a Khmelnytsky or something like this, that it would not be the country that the entire world is helping today.
You also write that the history of Ukrainian Jewry over the past decade is a key factor in understanding the development of Ukraine as a modern nation state. What about other people, other nations, and the Ukrainian people themselves, who were involved in the creation of Ukrainian history?
This is a historical question. So, that was a long time ago. So, I don't think there's any need to have deep emotions about what happened 300 years ago in the way that we do. A lot of us still have deep emotions about what happened 75 years ago. I think the statues of Khmelnytsky do not bother me personally, and I don't think they bother most Ukrainian Jews in the way that a statue like a Shukhevich bothers some Ukrainian Jews, right? That is within living memory. That is a political question. Khmelnytsky is an interesting historical figure who, in some people's estimation, made a bad decision on melding the country with Russia. Again, it doesn't really bother me, but there was historical pogroms against Catholic clergy, Catholics, Poles, and Jews. So this is I wouldn't say ancient history, but it's deep history. It's like 350 years ago. It's not a reason for me and my ethnic Ukrainian brothers not to get along today. We should, like in the way that Spanish people understand that part of the construction of a modern Spanish state 500 years ago was the Inquisition, and that was not so good by contemporary logic and contemporary social mores. We still have to look at the history honestly, and history has its own logic, right? We only have universal human rights since 1948 or 1949. I'm not going to go back and try to take statues of Columbus or Khmelnytsky down because that was 350, 500 years ago, and that's just history, right? Would I put up a statue of Khmelnytsky now in Brooklyn? Maybe not. But so I'd like to think I have a nuanced view of it, and obviously there is bad history in Ukraine between Russians, Ukrainians, Poles, Jews. The Jews and the Ukrainians were, constituent peoples in other people's empires without their own national sovereignty for a very long time. So you have to understand that not having your own country for a long time, it has bad effects, deformations on national character, in the way that too much suffering causes psychological trauma and deforms a person's character. Too much historical trauma also is not good for a people. So, I have a very economical and liberal view of that, and the statues of Khmelnytsky personally don't bother me. But also, we should teach exactly what happened between Khmelnytsky and the Poles and the Catholic cleargy, and yes, the Jews. So I hope that's a kind of satisfying answer.
The next question about your new book. You will present your book Jewish-Ukrainian Relations and the Birth of a Political Nation in Toronto on November 12th. And my question, what is the main idea of your book?
The book is a series of 25 interlinked essays and chapters explaining various facets of the Jewish-Ukrainian experience over the last 10 years. So it starts right before the Maidan and it ends with the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine and the brutality and genocide. I view the construction of a Ukrainian state as indivisible through the construction of a liberal political nation, and liberal with a small L, not a big L, liberal in the sense of tolerant and willing to live together and willing to not be contemptuous of others, not being too jingoistic, not being too intolerant of other ways of being in the world, of having economical heterodox relations and many different kinds of church structures and the rest of it, right? All the things that go into a multi-confessional state. That's one thing. Secondly, I have the thesis that in order to understand the way that the Ukrainian political state was constructed, you have to understand the debates taking place within the Ukrainian Jewish communities. That's the second thesis. Third idea is that Zelenskyy represents, because he's from a Russian-speaking family, because he's an outsider, an insider, because he is a ethnic minority, who also happens to be a Christian and Ukrainian, who is the first member of his generation to be the CEO, the executive of a state, represents the deep outcome of that whole conversation and series of developments. And fourth, there's just a lot I think that's interesting historically on the Babyn Yar Memorial Complex, on anti-Semitism, a lot on Russian propaganda. I deal with Russian historical views of Ukraine and World War II very deeply. I believe that you cannot understand the construction of the state without understanding the very deep importance of World War II memory politics. That is the Kremlin's obsession with it and the Ukrainians' alternative liberal view of it. So, there's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack, as the academics say.
And the last question, how do you see the wars in Ukraine and Israel being resolved?
Resolved? Oh my God. Well, okay, so this is, I do also have a political hat as an analyst for the Atlantic Council and Foreign Policy magazine. So I just came back from Ukraine. Obviously, this week there is a lot of doom and gloom in the media. This week that we're discussing this, the very first week of November, is the pod. There's a lot of doomy and gloomy prediction as the Ukrainian counteroffensive, which is very successful on the sea, but less successful on the land, is coming to the winter. And there's going to be kind of a lull in the Ukrainian counteroffensive as they try to figure out, by naming the general staff, try to figure out what comes next. The start of the Israeli-Gaza war has kind of discombobulated all previous understandings, and it's a black swan event that does not allow me to make predictions. So if you asked me this same question 3 weeks ago or a month ago, before before the Israeli-Gaza thing changed everything, I would have had a different set of answers. I don't know now because it's not apparent to me that the Americans won't try to speed rush a kind of unpleasant ceasefire armistice in the spring. It's not apparent what the outcome of Iran, Russia, America, Israel, Sunni axis, Shiite axis is going to be, and that certainly plays out on the Ukrainian battlefield because the Iranians are in direct conflict with both the Israeli and Ukrainian states. This just mixes up all the politics in Washington, D.C. and the European capitals and in Jerusalem in ways that make making predictions on the conflict very difficult. It's obvious that the Russians intend to push through until November, 1 year from now, when they know who the next American president will be. They obviously feel they can get a better deal under another American president, and they have no incentives to stop fighting now. Unlike Ukrainians, they don't care about human life or the life of their soldiers, and they've already paid all the costs and sanctions. So why stop now, right? Unless you get a really, really good deal, which no one's going to give them, hopefully, from the Ukrainian and the American side. So while this week has been very dispiriting in terms of the debate, in terms of of all the articles that are coming out about the counteroffensive, I do believe in the long term, good will triumph over evil, that the Ukrainians will win. Will Ukrainian army be in Crimea next summer? I hope so. They were supposed to be there by the end of the spring, but the Ukrainian army has not even taken Tokmak. Again, making predictions is a fool's errand, and I'd like to think that I'm not a fool.